and coordinator, we're having now a point of our interest because we're having now an exchange of views with the Spanish Minister of Interior, Fernando Grande-Marlaska, precisely on a point that has been certainly discussed through the works of the Libe Committee, both in committee and in Parliament. It's the situation brought about by the tragedy in Melilla, external border with Nador, Morocco, with a death toll which is not to be accepted nor normalised, for sure. But then, without further ado, because we are somewhat in delay, and we thank you for being patient enough. We kept you waiting for some minutes. Ministro Grande-Marlaska seguramente está conectado.
I'm sure you're connected now. Minister Grande-Marlaska, if you are connected, we are delighted to have you with us online to give us your statement for 10 minutes, and then we will have a round of questions from coordinators, 2 minutes each, and then we'll open the floor to other members who may wish to take the floor. They will be able to speak 1 minute each, and then there will be a joint response from yourself. We have 1 hour for this hearing, so we'll try to use it to its utmost. Welcome, Mr. Grande-Marlaska. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Libe Committee for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon for this exchange of points of view on the recent events on the 24th of June, where 23 migrants lost their lives and there were more than 50 civilians injured. This is a tragedy which should never have happened. Members of Parliament talking about the 24th of June events means we have to talk about migration, the importance of this. We have to be aware of the significance of this in European society. First of all, because we are a continent that for decades has needed migration, and because we are a continent whose main identity is based on social cohesion and freedom. So given the injustices throughout the world, the wars, the climate crisis, ethnic, racial persecutions, we cannot turn a blind eye given these human tragedies. Migration, and I'm sure that you will agree, when it is regular and organised and safe, has positive effects for our societies. However, when that migration is irregular, uncontrolled and unsafe, it's one of the worst crimes, which is the trafficking of human beings. And in this last case, it has no positive effects on the countries of reception, such as ours, because these are things that we have confirmed with leaders in Africa. It also has no benefit for those societies in the countries of origin and transit who lose their youth and put their society at risk. With that complex reality, I would like to ask you all for full involvement in migratory policy. First of all, because it's a reality which is here to stay. The first 2 months of 2023, Frontex detected 25,000 irregular entries into community territory by the maritime routes, 23,000 for the same period the previous year. Half of them through the Mediterranean, and that's about 400,000 the previous year. So it's a reality which requires greater involvement, because it's not just the Spanish border or the Italian or the Greek. It's affecting European borders. And this further involvement means that we need to state that migration is part of our demography. Are we going to accept that? Are we going to say that it needs management and responsibility? That's the debate. It's clear in society outside the walls of this parliament, but we need to think profoundly about the policy that we should attach to migration, because don't forget, we're talking about human beings, people with histories, with lives, and they shouldn't be dying at the door, on the doorstep of Europe. So, members of parliament, the events we have been experiencing should be kept in mind at all times. These are tragic effects. It should never have happened. As I've said when I've addressed the parliament in Spain, this is just to briefly outline what happened at 5 in the morning. The Moroccan security forces communicated to the Guardia Civil that a large number, 1,700 people, were moving towards Baiao. This could have been a disorganized group or a peaceful group, but this was related to page 3 of the Spanish Act, which said that this was a violent group. At 8:15, as we see from the prosecutor's service in the decree, page 4, there were confrontations with the Moroccan security forces, and the group managed to break through the security barrier. And the prosecutor's report says that shows a hostile and violent approach. They were using sticks and stones to attack the Moroccan and Spanish forces. The group started to become violent against the security forces. This is reported in the prosecutor's report, and the investigation of the prosecutor detained these people and confirmed that they were breaking down the doors between the two territories, and also opposing the security forces from Morocco and Spain. The amount of violence was indicated by the 120 security agents that were deployed, including helicopters and the presence of ambulances and staff from the emergency services. The entry of this group to Spanish territory was prevented. This is according to the prosecutor's report. Only 134 people managed to enter, and they were then dispersed and claimed international protection, and were attended to in the temporary migration centre in Melilla, which we see from the prosecutor's report. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, the Moroccan forces and the Spanish forces that have managed to stop that group of migrants notified firstly that they were making attempts to stop the violent acts, and proceeded to prevent them from passing the border, as was confirmed in the prosecutor's report. And the Constitutional Court of Spain confirmed this by handing down a sentence in the following February. So all of this happened in accordance with national and international law, as you can see on page 35 of the prosecutor's report. And the application for international protection was never rejected, as you can imagine. Spanish legislation clearly states that an intention using violence to pass a border is not a justification for claiming asylum. So these are the facts as were stated by the investigation of the prosecutor from Spain, mainly on Moroccan soil. These are facts which stem from a violent, unjustified attempt to permeate the European border. The Spanish forces acted in accordance with human rights law. With those facts, unfortunately, we did lose the lives of a number of migrants, and we had many people injured, including some of our security agents. And as I say, again, these things should never have happened, because it's not acceptable to attack the border of the European Union. And we cannot allow violence to be the only way to claim asylum in the EU. The Spanish government has been able to act with compassion towards the families, with transparency with the institutions. And before the Spanish Parliament, we've had questions and answers to different questions asked about the facts of the case. Communication has been flowing smoothly. We've been able to fully investigate the case, and it's true that in certain cases it was the communication services that were gaining most attention. They were also made available the information that we had 8 hours of recordings from the cameras, the drones, the helicopters, more than 8 hours of recordings which have been made available, but only 1.5 hours of the recording was able to be seen. In parallel, we immediately started the official investigation, and the most official investigation, which is that of the state's prosecutor's office, is important to note, because they say there are no elements to determine that the state security forces have carried out any infringement in the development of the measures taken for the actions on the border. So, cooperation and transparency at all times on the part of the Spanish government. Now, this is in contrast with the attitudes of others. We've heard members of the chamber having seen only one video and making accusations such that people are dying in our country, people are being injured in our country, and that Spain is not attending to them. This is an accusation from the Popular Party. I think some of your colleagues are very familiar with the work of the state, and I hope you will be aware that we have been preserving the rights of the migrants. These are declarations of great gravity. So, Chairman, members of Parliament, I'm coming to an end now. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this exchange. Migration is a reality. It's here to stay. We have two options. Or we try to achieve the impossible, or we get involved in its management. So I would like to ask for the latter. Let's make migration a European matter, because we're all concerned by it. Thank you, Mr. Marlaska. Now, we would like to make the most of this hour, so we'll go straight on to the 7 parliamentary groups' interventions. So 2 minutes for a question, 2 minutes for an answer, and then there'll be a second round of 1 minute for each member who wishes to speak, who put their hand up saying that they'd like to speak. That will be 1 minute each, a whole round, and then one final round for our guest. So starting with the EPP.
The floor is yours.
Yes, indeed. We were very lucky to manage to catch the most of the debate yesterday in Spain about the motion of no censure. It was a very extraordinary experience. But thank you very much, Mr. President, dear Minister. Thank you for being with us today. And might I respectfully add that it took you long enough. You spoke about recent events in your introduction. We're talking about something that happened 9 months ago. And 9 months ago, you were invited to this Parliament, and for 9 months, you mainly made it clear that you had no intention to come here, sending us a link to a video recording of the debate in Spain instead. And I just have to say, if this is your idea of respectful exchanges with the European Parliament, I'm not holding my hopes up for our relations under the Spanish presidency later. I do agree with what you said. Melilla is both a Spanish and a European external border, and that's exactly the point why this should be discussed here, because we're also concerned. And this is not about how the Spanish military police behave, but it's about scrutinizing the political handling and the management of the situation. And there's a lack of transparency from the Spanish government, and it's disturbing. The conclusions that everything is resolved simply doesn't hold, as your version of events continues to be disproved by other sources and witnesses. Looking at other available evidence about the number of deaths and wounded, about how medical assistance was delayed for hours, about how people who no longer posed a threat were still repeatedly beaten, about how some of these events took place on Spanish soil as well. So the question is, do you really still maintain that everything took place on Moroccan soil, that there were no deaths on Spanish soil and there were no hot returns to Morocco? Is the death count still 23, or is it more than 70, as some sources indicate? You spoke in your introduction about a number of migrants, but you didn't give any definitive answers. Could you give a clearer indication about the number of deaths and wounded in this situation? And then lastly, on a slightly different but connected topic, it's hard to miss when looking at the borders in Melilla and Ceuta that there are quite significant walls and fences there to manage that border. And I would just like to ask you, why do you think it is necessary to have those fences to properly manage the border or not? Because I'm asking this because here in the Parliament, the leader of the Socialist group from Spain, Ms. Irache Garcia Perez, said that walls and fences represent the most miserable vision of humanity and that they are a false solution of ultra-nationalists presenting foreigners as a threat. So my question to you is, are you an ultra-nationalist presenting foreigners as a threat, or do you disagree with Ms. Garcia Perez on this? Thank you.
Floor goes back to you, Minister. Ministro, tiene la palabra 2 minutos para responder.
You have 2 minutes to respond, Minister. That's the format we're using.
Gracias, señor presidente. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lenners. I'd like to thank you for the question. And let me just say that there's absolutely no lack of transparency. Investigations were carried out with the full knowledge of the prosecutor, and everyone was aware of what's going on, as you'd expect to be the case in a democracy like Spain's. The recordings from the drones, the helicopter, the fixed cameras, all of that was made available to members of the Spanish Parliament. I mean, it was a shame that it took 9 months, but there were reasons for that. I went to the Spanish Parliament on 2 occasions, and I said that when the investigation was concluded, well, that would be the best time for this exchange of views. So that's why it's been so long, but no tragic element has been covered up. I don't know what you've found out from your investigations, but the official investigation with all evidence was properly carried out by the state of Spain. And just very briefly, and perhaps not sticking to time as I should, but the 23 deaths were the ones that were reported by the official Moroccan investigators, but none of those took place in Spain. The BBC rectified its reports. So the BBC rarely rectifies investigations that it's carried out, but in this case they did rectify their investigation. They said that no tragic event took place in Spain. Thank you.
Are you?
But no, he didn't answer the question about why he feels those fences and walls are necessary to manage the external border.
¿Quiere un comentario adicional sobre esto, ministro?
Would you like to make a further comment on that, Minister? Well, yes, just very briefly. Obviously, the European borders need to be protected, but I would say that in June 2018, this government took down what we had in place at the time, and in terms of fencing, and we put up fences made of materials that are less dangerous for migrants. That obviously doesn't mean that we don't have to have dissuasive elements in place to try and stop people illegally coming into Europe, but always in line with human rights considerations, of course. Thank you.
S&D Coordinator Birgit Sippel, 5 Minuten.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. And I'm very happy that you started to say that migration is something very normal, that most of our member states are in need of migration and it should be better organized. And I think that's true both for those who are looking for employment, but also for those who are seeking for protection. You also then continue to say that no one should die on our doorsteps. I also agree on that. But the bad story is that people are not only dying on our doorsteps, but on the long way trying to get to Europe. They are dying in the Mediterranean, they are dying in Libya, they are dying in the deserts on the African continent. I don't know the exact date since when the fences around Ceuta Melilla do exist, but obviously they do exist since long. And having in mind that, of course, migrants know how dangerous the way is. They know very well not everybody makes it to Europe. They know very well many of their people, friends are dying on the way. Nevertheless, even though those fences exist, they continue coming. So do you really believe fences are a solution? And if you are not convinced they are a solution, what precisely have the Spanish governments, since building of the fences, done trying to better organize migration, again, both for those who are looking for employment and those who are looking for asylum? And a final question, with all the many guards and cameras around the fences, was there really no choice to better react on a big group of people coming than in the way it happened on that very day? Thank you.
La palabra de nuevo para usted, ministro.
You have the floor, Minister. Thank you very much, and thank you to you, Mrs. Zippel. Well, on the fencing, I mean, that fencing has been there since time immemorial, if I may say so. I mean, we have tried to ensure that what we have in place is in line with human rights and also protects our borders. I mean, as I've said, irregular migration leaves the door open to people trafficking, migrant trafficking. I mean, these are people who are exploited and whose dignity is violated by these mafias. I mean, I think Spain is exemplary in the European Union. I've been a minister now for 5 years, and we are a country which European migration policy is looking to now. We work closely with transit countries and countries of origin, and we work to protect borders, to fight illegal migration, and to try and deal with trafficking networks. We work with Morocco, Gambia, and other countries. But there's also cross-cutting cooperation on legal migration. The various ministries in Spain are working very hard to ensure that the essential migration that we need can take place, and that's legal migration. I mean, the fencing, I've talked about that, but pursuant to the investigation carried out by the prosecutor's office and the images that we have, this was over 1,700 people trying to cross the border. They were working in an organised manner, and they were acting in a dangerous manner, dangerous for themselves, but also dangerous for the physical integrity of the forces of law and order. I mean, this was a tragedy that should never have happened, as I say, but Spain is a country that works with countries of origin and transit countries and is getting our philosophy across to the European Union as well. Demographic challenges are here to stay, unfortunately, and we need to work in a horizontal, cross-cutting manner with Africa, because this is a challenge for Africa and also for Europe. Thank you.
Now the floor goes to Renew coordinator. I understand the floor will go now to, I see, Maite Pagazaurtundúa. Okay, 2 minutos.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, the facts that took place on the 24th of June 2022 really highlighted what the European Union's doing in terms of defending human rights. I think it's Morocco that wasn't transparent here, and allowing these 23 people to be killed, it was not appropriate, or to die was not appropriate. The Lighthouse report talks about someone who was injured in Spanish territory. The fencing and gates were damaged, and it was a Spanish company that had to go and repair them. And another thing that's been known for a long time is that the forces of law and order on the borders struggle and feel that they're left behind. I mean, many of them are injured. But as decision makers, we can't simply hide behind these forces, these border forces. We do what they can, but can't do their jobs appropriately for various reasons. But we shouldn't look the other way. We've seen people die, we've seen people abandoned, and possibly more than the figures that Morocco has given us, the figures that you've approved. So the question is, if security can't be maintained on the border, that's something that needs to be recognised. So have you assessed the problems that you have on that border? Have you communicated with the Commission to tell them what Spain's real needs are in terms of border protection? And have you thought about further developments that are necessary in these border areas? Have you got in touch with the families of the victims that could be identified? And a final question, a director of the Moroccan Border Security Defence Agency talked about traffickers and talked about this being carried out by militias that are in countries destabilized by war. Have you done any investigation there? Have you worked with Frontex, etc.? Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pagazaurtundúa. I would say that unlike other governments, such as previous governments, we have for 5 years been seriously investing in the borders of Ceuta and Melilla, and I'm surprised that you don't know about that. There are more public officials, there are more border forces. We have increased the number of officers we have in Ceuta and Melilla by 10% over the last 4 years. Now, the security breach, I don't think it's as bad as you say, but the problems aren't as bad as you say, but obviously we assess everything that we do as is appropriate, particularly when tragic events such as those that we're talking about today take place. And obviously we work with Frontex and all EU agencies. So security problems, I would say, massive security problems, I'd say no. I think that our border forces feel more support than ever now, because the Ministry of the Interior doesn't hide behind them. Right from the start, we were on the front line. We knew that our border forces had acted in a proportionate manner. This is a tragedy that should never have happened, as I say, but this was an organised, violent attack on our borders. I don't need to refer to other kinds of investigations, but if you have any doubts as a member of the European Parliament from Spain. If you have any doubts about our border forces, well, all I can say is that, as I said before, the BBC rectified its reports. It said that no injury or death took place on Spanish territory. So if you've got accusations to make against the Spanish border forces, well, you'll have to act in accordance. I mean, but we have done everything possible to ensure that our activities are constantly improved on. Thank you.
Greens, I understand. Tineka Strick, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for being here. But let me make clear, despite your conclusions and the conclusions of your government, we see that all external investigations and recordings shows that this brutal crackdown on migrants was avoidable and it was predictable. And I must say that if you look at the recordings, it's so clear that both Moroccan and Spanish border guards have misbehaved hugely and have beaten up people. And I would say that Morocco and Spain are partners in crime in this. If you see that people are beaten up and then in a wounded state being simply transferred to the Moroccan territory without taking care of them, then you cannot say that Spain is under attack. No, the migrants, the innocent people, were under attack and were being with the death as a result of many people. So I would really love to see that you are also be held accountable and that you admit what has gone wrong and that also lessons are learned from this, what has happened there. And I think that it should be clear that the right to asylum, access to an asylum procedure should still be key. And what we see, despite what the government says, is that especially for sub-Saharan migrants, it's not possible physically to enter border crossing points at Melilla and to ask for asylum. It's simply impossible for them. On the one hand, because it's physically, they cannot reach it, because of Moroccan being paid, the Moroccan border guards being paid to deter them and to keep them away from the border crossing points. And as you see the way that Morocco is doing that, using a lot of violence, I really wonder how you can do this in a responsible way, paying Spain a lot of money to violate the human rights of migrants and also to prevent them from asking asylum at the EU territory. So could you please answer to this, how you can reconcile this with your responsibility to uphold the asylum acquis that we have in the EU?
Thank you. Minister, back to you. La palabra.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Strick. Well, obviously I don't share everything that you say, with all due respect, but I don't think I have to take any responsibility on board because the actions of the Spanish border guards and security forces were proportionate. They were legal and they were necessary to deal with this violent attack. And I'll say once again that there was an investigation from the Spanish prosecutor's office, and also the BBC rectified its investigation, as I've mentioned, but the official Spanish investigation is the main one that we go by. But as I say, the BBC rectified its investigation and no Spanish official beat any migrant at all in the way that you mention. I mean, we've seen all the images, we saw how the efforts were really peacefully made to prevent the migrants coming in. And then everything was done in line with guidance also from the European Court of Human Rights. So there were people who violently attacked the border. They weren't vulnerable people, they weren't women, they weren't elderly people, they weren't minors. And given all of that, also, they were given the possibility to ask for international protection. Now, on asylum, in Spain, we get the third most requests for international protection and asylum in the European Union, 120,000 last year. This year, in 3 months, we have over 40,000 requests. So when it comes to international protection and asylum, once again, I would say that our country can't be criticised. We have increased the Office for Asylum and Migration, and that's something that we can get to if you want more information.
For the following group, which is ID, normally, I understand it'll be Madame Chagnon. C'est ça? Vous avez la parole. 2 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister. I'd like to thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your presentation to us. Well, clearly, the migrant flows are people from sub-Saharan Africa who are searching for a fortune. They want to reach the European continent. I'd like to thank you because your socialist government has had to give in to the evidence. Borders protect us, just as a front door protects your house. Yes, borders are a protection. And if our border is not solid enough to protect us, we need to reinforce it. We need to reinforce our door, which is exactly what you're doing. Minister, reality has taken precedence over ideology for you, and I'd like to salute the courage that you have shown in protecting your country from these hordes of migrants and from pro-immigration politicians from the European Union who seem to be complaining all the time. Thank you.
Señor Ministro, su tiempo para responder.
Minister, you have the floor again to respond, please.
Bien, muy brevemente, señora Chagnon.
Well, just very briefly, Mrs. Chagnon, thank you very much for your question. I would go back of what I said at the start, actually, which is that migration is a challenge. It's not a problem. It's here to stay. And let me take this opportunity to mention something that came up in a conversation with the President of Senegal. He said that in 2030, Africa will go from 1.3 billion to 1.75 billion inhabitants and 2.5 billion by 2050, so the population of Africa will double. Migration is a challenge and it has to be dealt with by Africa and Europe jointly. They don't want to use their young people, and they're suffering when they see people losing their dignity when they're trafficked by mafias. We need to take all of that seriously. We need to have joint work plans with Africa. I've spent 5 years now talking about borders. There's no need for human tragedies. I mean, people are, however, leaving their countries for whatever reason, poverty, climate change, etc. These are the issues that we need to deal with Africa, and I hope that you'll help me work in a coordinated manner on these issues. We've been working on them for a long time now bilaterally in Spain, and obviously we fight traffickers as well, these trafficking groups that put the lives of women, children and men at risk. These are people who suffer and lose their lives in transit. We're working to ensure that we have properly managed legal migration. I think that's the way to go. We're working on the Migration Pact now, and as part of that, we need to ensure that we can bring together the principle of responsibility and the principle of solidarity. Thank you.
Group, I don't see any hands being raised. So if I'm not mistaken, we shall move right to the left, which will be Miguel Urbán. Tiene la palabra, 2 minutos.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, better late than never, I think. 10 months after the murders of over 40 people on our borders, finally, you're here, Minister, although remotely. Let me begin by asking whether you would reiterate those words that stated that the issue was well resolved. I mean, we're talking about 40 dead, Minister. Would you reiterate those words? And what would you say about the situation being appropriately resolved? I mean, 470 returns were carried out, including injured people and minors. I mean, this really is a massive violation of international law. So these people were illegally expelled. I mean, these were asylum seekers who were illegally expelled. I mean, would you say that shows that the situation was appropriately resolved? In addition, apparently there was an ambulance 30 metres from what happened. Why wasn't it used to help injured people who suffered for hours? Why weren't the gates opened to prevent the stampede which led to these deaths? I mean, this is a clear example of failure to provide assistance, which goes against international law. You continue to say that this is an appropriately resolved case. Minister, the Lighthouse Report investigation stated that there was one death on Spanish soil. That's not something that they've rectified. So this information continues to be out there. I mean, and I'd also note that it's just the far right who congratulated you for what you've done. I mean, I see that you're getting closer and closer to Mrs. Maloney's migration policies, Minister. There is a possibility to ask for asylum from the Spanish embassy in Morocco. That's what you say, but this goes against what's said by the UN rapporteur for the rights of migrants and others who have said that this is actually not possible. I would tell you that in mid-December, a survivor of what happened last year requested asylum in the Spanish embassy in Rabat, and they've spent months waiting to be taken to Spanish soil. Excuse me. I mean, can we really say that this was appropriately resolved, this case? I think it really is time to change our migration and asylum policies in Europe and Spain. Minister, please change your policy. You're too much like Mrs. Maloney. Thank you.
El señor Urban ha excedido su tiempo, de modo que por...
Okay, Minister, let me give you the floor to respond. We heard a bit too much from the person asking the question. Well, yes, thank you very much, Mr. Urban. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I imagined that these prejudices that you have would remain in spite of any investigation or whatever, and I say that because we shouldn't be blinded by prejudice. On my migration policy, I think the previous question dealt with that. I mean, had you listened to me, I said that my migration policy is very close to a policy approved by the President of Senegal, but this has nothing to do with disorganized, irregular, illegal migration which risks the dignity and lives of the migrants themselves. I mean, what is it that fosters this kind of migration? It's unfortunately traffickers and populists. We are implementing a comprehensive, integrated migration policy, co-responsibility. We work very closely with transit and countries of origin. We speak to them as partners. We don't talk down to them as the EU. And once again, I would refer you to the BBC. This is a group that rectified its initial investigation, admitting that it had got it wrong. I mean, and also the official investigation is there. I mean, obviously you don't believe in the impartiality of our prosecutors and our investigation, but that's a different issue. When it comes to the returns on the border, no one vulnerable was there. These violent attacks on the border took place, and the European Court of Human Rights agreed that that was the case. In Spain, you can ask for asylum and refuge in many different ways. There is no problem in people being able to do that, including in Ceuta and Melilla. Thank you.
For the non-inscrit, I see the hand of Mr. Hitzvegi. You've got the floor to complete the first round, and then those who have shown interest by raising your cards, you will have 1 minute each, and final reply from the Interior Minister of Spain. Okay, it'll be 1 minute each. But please, Mr. Hitzvegi, you have 2 minutes now.
Thank you for the floor, Minister. Thank you for being here. It goes without saying that the loss of human life is always a tragedy, and this is the case, including the Melilla incident also. But let's be clear about one thing. Border guards should not be attacked, and security forces, for doing their job, which is to protect a border
and to make sure that no illegal entries are possible. So full support should go to those people who do their job, Spanish, Moroccan, Hungarian, whatever they may be. We also hear, however, that there is also always a political line of attack. There are those people for whom it's always more important to defend those who break the law instead of standing up for those who protect the law and respect it, like border guards or security forces. We've heard it here today. We've heard people saying innocent people. Well, they were not innocent people. They're culpable of attacking a border and attacking border guards aggressive. They have put themselves into that situation. Minister, I'd like to ask you specifically about border fences and border walls. Like your country, mine also has erected a border wall in the southern border of Hungary, which is an effective way of protecting the Hungarian and the European border against illegal entries and human smugglers. Spain is soon to take over the presidency of the European Union. Will you act to make the Commission fund pay for physical border protections like walls and fences? This was already recently the conclusion of a European Council meeting. I respect your conviction to protect borders. Will you support, when you're President of the European Union, that the Commission contributes to those costs for countries that protect European borders? Thank you.
Ministro, adelante.
Go ahead, Minister. Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, I'll just say briefly that in Ceuta, Melilla, with this land border, it's been there for such a long time, and what we have done, the measures we've taken, is bring greater security, greater technology, and withdraw all the elements that were dangerous physically for people who attack them. So this is protecting the border, but having a smart border without the elements that can risk the physical integrity of a person. And what we are going to promote, I keep saying this, as the forthcoming EU presidency, is the external dimension, real financing of the external border of the EU, work with the countries of origin and transit. We want to work with those countries to avoid unsafe, disorganised, irregular migration and favour regular, organised, safe migration and fight the mafia. EU should be strategically financing projects with the countries of origin and transit. Thank you, Minister.
Time handling for the 1 hour allocated to the slot of this working agenda of us in the busy order of the day. Today I have listed 5 of you, and now I'm closing the list. It'll be 5, 1 minute each, and then final round for the Minister, okay? First floor goes to Señor Sarsalejos. 1 minuto, por favor.
Thank you, Minister. Well, after that tragedy, I'm delighted to see you. I thought you were going to say something more nuanced, more calm about this tragedy. And what we see is a Minister of the Interior who is attacking the EPP. Before the EPP coordinator had even spoken, a minister that is focusing too much on the repression of the Parliament. This committee is aware of the complexity and the difficulties of migration, and we are working hard on it. I can also say that the EPP very well knows the actions of the Guardia Civil. It's difficult to accept for us, though, that you use your right to accuse us of putting spanners in the works of the prosecutor's work. That's not acceptable, because if there is someone who questioned the impartiality of the prosecutor, it was us, because we said it depends on the government. I just want to ask you one question. 9 months afterwards, can you say in this committee that everything went fine, everything was done well, or is there anything that could have been improved?
To 1 minute, please. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to stick to a very specific point, because in my understanding you talked about human trafficking and smuggling. I understand the situation that the people actually making use of their large number, like 500 people coming to cross the border. And of course, that's not a good idea. It's very dangerous, and this tragedy happened, as we know. My specific question is, can you actually tell us how human trafficking takes place there, or how smugglers act there? To my understanding, there are no traffickers and smugglers needed for these actions, and it feels a little bit like blaming the others always. So can you maybe elaborate on that, and also explain me the difference between trafficking and smuggling?
Thank you. Now, the floor will go to Cira Rego. 1 minuto.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marlaska, I think that self-criticism and justice are always positive, particularly in these dramatic situations with so many lives lost. It's a matter of humanity and democracy. Modern, fair, free democracy should respect human rights and cannot allow images such as what happened in Melilla. I think Spain holds responsibility in what happened. These people were fleeing an armed conflict. My group in the Congress has said this. In any case, the situation in Melilla is a consequence of European migratory policy, externalization, militarization of borders, returns, agreements with Morocco, with Turkey, and the lack of a guarantee for asylum. We don't have that. This is a fact. There is no physical point for where you can apply for asylum on the southern border. We've got the data. What happens when we get asylum seekers from Venezuela and Colombia. They don't come through the southern border. So, Mr. Marlaska, you're here, and Spain is going to be taking on the presidency next. So can you trigger an exchange, bring about a change in the migration package so that we don't have to suffer another crisis, another tragedy such as this?
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Mr. Marlaska. I'm from Galicia. I would like to show you this photo which went around the world. I will never forget this, because Greek lives are important as well, and these were not tragedies such as the one you described. What happened here was a massacre, and we in the European Parliament have denounced this in many groups. It's not just one isolated member of Parliament criticising this situation. No, it was unanimous criticism here of what happened in Melilla. It was shameful, and that is a consequence of the externalisation of the borders, paying Morocco, where there is a lack of freedoms for and provoking people to try to get to Europe. So if you can answer my question. Have you asked Morocco for explanations about the people who lost their lives? And have you asked for autopsies? Why were 500 people returned to Morocco after that? What rights do the sub-Saharan people have for asylum in Spain? and it was concluded that these returns were illegal. So why do you continue to insist that they are not legalized when there are so many contradictions surrounding it? Thank you, Minister. Thank you for being with us at the right time. Why is it the right time? Because there was a lot of impatience on the part of members of this committee. We wanted to see you in the autumn. But those members didn't care about the people who died. What they wanted was for you to fall. The only question I was asked outside this room was, is Minister Marlaska going to fall? So that was clear. Wasn't about the facts. So I think now is the right time because, as you said, we are facing challenges in the future. This is not the last time. There have been several tragedies, and there are going to be more. So I would like to ask members of this House, members from the right and the far right, to support the Migration Pact, support what Spain is doing, cooperating with countries of origin and transit. We have reduced the arrivals of irregular migrants by 23% over the last year, and we should open regular channels for migration because we need them. There are directives on the table. I'm a rapporteur for the single permit, and I would like to ask this chamber to support us in negotiations with Council under Spanish presidency so that we can make progress with these instruments. As I repeat, these are the best instrument to fight against irregular migration and trafficking in human beings. Minister, you have the last say to answer those questions from that second round. Thank you. I will try to answer those questions briefly. Thank you to everyone for those questions. Mr. Saralejos, 9 months. Well, yes, I went to the Congress in Spain on 2 occasions during the government control sessions, and I had promised that. It's my duty to come to the European Parliament and the Libe Committee to talk about this tragedy of the 24th of June 2022. But I haven't seen any EPP Home Affairs Minister addressing the Spanish Parliament on any kind of tragedy such as this, or any committee, or the European Parliament. So perhaps we have different ideas of responsibility and respect for institutions. I do not regret anything I said. What I said was that Mr. González Pons, this is reality. I went to the Guardia Civil, not as Minister of Home Affairs. And it's true, in 2017 there were those events in Catalonia. He said he didn't know anything about it. And that is not bearing responsibility. Any politician needs to bear responsibility, and certainly a Minister of Home Affairs. Mr. Marqual, I have no time to give you any reference on this. I am aware of the phenomenon of trafficking and smuggling. It's exploitation, sexual exploitation, work, labour exploitation, slavery, and what happens with trafficking is that is promoted by attacking their dignity. We are breaking down networks. I can give you all the information from all the networks that are being broken up in Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal, etc. They put migrants in disastrous conditions because they need to transfer them from one place to another. They need to keep them in one place before the journey to Europe. and they're playing with their lives. You'll have seen what happened in Melilla and the slavery conditions that those migrants. So, Mr. Macron, that is human trafficking. Mr. Next speaker. Well, self-criticism. Yes, I am exercising self-criticism, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make any effort. Of course, we need to show proportionality for this attack, and we're not externalizing our borders. I'm sorry that you have that feeling towards the different countries of Africa. We talk to them about everything. We try to avoid these tragedies and guarantee regular, safe migration. Mr. Miranda, same thing on externalization. It's a paternalist, Eurocentrist approach. We need to act in a different way. And you talked about returns on the border. In the last report, different terms were used. But what you don't like referring to is the fact that the state prosecutor said that those returns on the border were in line with Spanish and international law and with what the European Court of Human Rights has said in its great chamber and the judgment. And then Mr. Moreno, thank you for your words on migration. We are working in parameters of responsibility. It's a challenge that we are facing and that we need to face in the most reasonable way. As the chairman of the Libe committee knows, a lot of work is being done on the Migration Pact so that we can finally get that agreement together and get those trilogues up soon. And we're looking forward to hearing from the Parliament on its stance on the Migration Pact, and we're hoping that in the next presidencies, Spanish and Belgian, we will be able to make progress on that, because it's also part of our responsibility. We've got these two principles of shared responsibility and solidarity, and we're looking to reconcile them in the right way. There are two main regulations. I'm coming to an end, Chairman. The one on management and procedures, but there's another important one, the one on the crisis, and I believe that the chairman of Libe is rapporteur on that, and we need to reconcile those two principles. So we need to, I would like to invite Mr. Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, to speak to you and share opinions with you, which I think would be very interesting about what that EU-Africa cooperation might look like. Thank you very much, members of Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Marlaska, for sharing this moment with us this afternoon. It's been very necessary, of course, to have this debate. We're talking here about something that concerns all of us, a tragedy with a number of lives lost, which is unacceptable. So, of course, whatever we can do, we need to do to avoid the EU having to experience these tragedies in the future on its external borders, whether it be Melilla or elsewhere, or Lampedusa, or anywhere else where we've had this same kind of debate as the one we've had this afternoon. We are working on a migration pact which aims to strike a balance between shared responsibility and solidarity, to include a common European response for this external dimension involving countries of origin and transit, and that external border includes a search and rescue element. Now, this has been Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Announcing that tomorrow we're resuming our works at 900. I thank you all for your contributions. I thank you all the participants, all those who took the floor in this discussion, and I'm only announcing that tomorrow by 900 we are resuming our work in the Libe Committee with a joint meeting with the CONT Committee and the European Public Prosecutor. The EPO is reporting by 900 tomorrow. Madame Laura Covesi will be here on the stand, on the podium before you. So please, have a nice evening. See you tomorrow 9 a.m. Bye now.